Let's do it.
Apparently they got that should be there.
All right, welcome to Improvement and Services for December 13th, 2023. I will also state that the entire committee is here. So I would ask for an approval of the agenda
Motion to approve.
by Eck. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Campbell. Any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, next approval of the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Second by Eck, seconded by Weary. Any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, that passes unanimously. All right, number one, consideration with possible action on request by Department of Public Works to adopt the proposed 2024 sanitary sewer service charges. Director.
Okay, we've included information in your packet. This is the same information we provide you each year at this time regarding the rates that are being charged to customers for sanitary sewer. The sanitary sewer charges are determined annually based on a combination of the City of Green Bay's approved budget and the Green Bay Metropolitan Sewerage District's 2024 rates. GBMSD met last week and formally adopted their rates, turned around and sent their rates on to us. We've incorporated them and put them into the packet. Current rate, or the rate proposed for 2024 for an average residential customer is approximately $152.26 per quarter. The volume charge is $6.17 per 100 cubic feet. So when you go to the packet, the first 2 pages of the supporting documentation show the calculations based on for non-monitored users. That's our average residential customers. We don't monitor their flows. So the top portion shows the average strength of the wastewater coming out. The next item indicates the service charge is a combination of customer and volume charge. The customer charge is based off of their water meter size, and then the volume charge is the rates that come from GBMSD. Flip over to page 2, and we also have the volume charges. So there is a GBMSD charge, and then the city's collection charge. That city collection charge is a direct calculation that comes out of our city's adopted sanitary sewer budget. Following down under section 42-30, sub C, sub 2, monitor users, that's our paper mills. So we actually go out and we monitor the strength of that wastewater, and we bill back on a pass-through charge from GBMSD based on the load calculations that you see in the bottom of page 1. So again, we get down to a quantity charge for the volume, BOD, total suspended solids, phosphorus, and total nitrogen. Then also there is a sampling charge that is passed on to those customers. Going to page 3, what we have is the rate history since 1999 for the volume charge for our non-monitored users, and you can see there's a GBMSD charge and a city charge. Then moving over to the next set of columns, it's the minimum charge for non-monitored users, so everybody gets a basic allotment. And if your meter reading is below that base, that's the base charge you get assessed. If your volume charge is higher than that, then you get upcharged as a result of that. Next column is the quarterly charge for an average household, and then what our sanitary sewer budget was for the year. So if you follow that down to 2024, you can see and compare 2024 to 2023. The GBMSD charge was $3.83 per 100 cubic feet last year. That has gone up to $3.88. The city charge has remained constant at $2.29. So the average cost of the consumer went from $6.12 to $6.17. That's a 0.82% upcharge, and again 100% due to increased charges from Green Bay Met. The last page is simply a graph that graphically shows you what the sanitary sewer charge history has been. So staff is recommending approval of the rates as identified.
Just a quick question. It's only gone up 5 cents. Have you ever, I don't see it where it's ever gone down maybe a cent or two. Is it always on the uptick?
I have never seen it go down.
Okay, and
Oh wait, 147 to 141 and 132 back in
Oh, sure.
1999,
Okay,
2000.
all right.
1999 to 2000.
All right, well, I'm just wondering if that's just the general trend because of,
And it will continue to be the trend. About 10 to 12 years ago, Green Bay Met started a project that they refer to as their R2E2, or Resource Recovery Energy Efficiency Project. And in layman's terms, what they were looking at, when you treat wastewater, you get a water effluent that's discharged back out to the river, and then there's solids that need to be handled. R2E2 concentrated on the solids. So they've got that done. That was $300 million project. They have another project that is concentrating on the front end of the plant. So the pumps, every gallon of wastewater that goes to the GBMSD plant has to be pumped there, because the interceptor sewers under Quincy Street are 28 feet below grade. So all that water has to be pumped up into the plant. And then the large, if you drive across the Freeville Bridge and you look at the plant, you see the large clarifiers, and they've got the skimmers on top. All that's original equipment from the 1950s. So the concrete's okay, it's in good shape, but a lot of those metal components are starting to rust and show wear. So they're doing the front end of the plant now. That's another $147 million worth of investment they're going to be making over the next several years. And they have told us to expect anywhere from 7 to 10% increases each year over the course of the next 10 years. We're 2 or 3 years into that. So even with that heavy investment and upcharges that come along with that, we have been able to hold our rates steady for the consumer to do our part to try and hold that. So we do expect to see increases coming, but we're doing everything that we can to moderate those.
Alderman Campbell.
I mean, I used to drive over there every day. When are we gonna use the methane gas burn off from that to harness that energy?
That would be something to talk to GBMSD about.
I mean, just like any burn off on any oil well, you know? Just an idea after
Yeah.
last week's conversation.
Well, we talked about everything.
Okay.
Well,
Um,
what's your,
yeah.
anybody
all right.
else?
Motion to approve?
Okay, by Eck.
Second,
By
Look at
Campbell.
me.
and that's kind
Any other
of
Hey,
discussion?
I approve a lot of things.
crappy subject.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, that passes unanimously. All right, let's get back here.
I'm glad you used the word solids.
Yeah,
Uh,
all right. Number 2, consideration with possible action to approve the acceptance of the $741,187.50 National Coastline Resilience Fund and CRF grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation with a local match of $82,500, and to authorize the Director of Public Works to enter into necessary agreements. Director?
Okay, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation has awarded us a grant in the amount of $741,187.50 through the National Coast Resilience Fund. These grant funds will be used to develop the preliminary engineering plan for a shoreland protection and enhancement project, causeway improvements and shoreline redevelopment, addressing wave action, flood mitigation, and improving water flow between Renard Island and the Bay Beach property, and potential inland measures to improve and expand habitat while allow for waterfront public access and recreation. Project area basically runs from South Bay Marina down to Bay Beach, including that marshy area between Renard Island and the beach. The grant does require a local match of $82,500. $50,000 in cash is being donated by the McDonald companies. $25,000 worth of in-kind services, so we're going to provide staff to do work on the project. That counts towards it. So that's $25,000 in cash or in-kind by Green Bay Public Works staff, and $7,500 of in-kind donations by GEI Consultants Incorporated. And our staff will be responsible for grant administration, so there's a lot of information in the packet relative to the objectives that this is intended to accomplish, not the least of which there are going to be some improvements down near South Bay to help mitigate wave action coming into the river, some enhanced bulkhead lines, some additional in-water structures that will protect between South Bay and Renard Island, and then potentially looking at design of some marsh with boating channels to go between Renard Island and Bay Beach. Also, one of the things that we're looking at is on the McDonald property, between the causeway to Renard Island and where South Bay Marine is, that property is proposed to have the beach that we weren't able to get at Bay Beach, and there would be public access there, but that would be through the McDonald companies. So, looking at the preliminary engineering and the feasibility of continuing with a beach project elsewhere on the south shore of the Bay of Green Bay.
So that's ways down.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Alderman.
So that, it's down, well,
It's
west, right?
West.
Correct. It would be north of where the warehouses are on Bay Beach Road.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
So,
I don't
is that
know.
partly private then? or-
It is, but this is a public-private partnership that we're looking to develop. We've got to do the engineering to see if it's feasible first, but the McDonald companies have indicated that they are very, very interested in developing everything from South Point Marina down through and hooking up to Bay Beach, and in the future, connecting it with a walkway, and I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff going on out here that they're willing to help underwrite some of the cost for.
Okay, how would that, in a sense, and maybe I know the answer, but how would it benefit McDonald in that sense? I mean, having people come out there and,
Well,
you know, I mean, is it more public relations?
it's more that they are investing as a community partner. In addition to that, some of what's proposed in here could help enhance boating opportunities and access to the water. And that's one of the things that Chip McDonald personally is very involved with, is the Green Bay Paddle and Sail Foundation, and getting kids connected to the water through
So
sailing
there,
and boating.
okay, so there is some benefit. Yep, Alderman?
I was wondering, has McDonald's shown interest in selling some of that property? I'm surprised we haven't had a development, 8-story, 10-story condo unit overlooking the bay right there.
At this point, Chip hasn't indicated any interest in selling the property. I think and I've had a lot of meetings with him relative to this type of an approach. What he really wants to do is he wants to, number one, protect the south shore of the bay against erosion and wave action problems, stopping the flooding and wave run-ups that we've had in the past. And again, secondly, his big focus is connecting youth with the water and getting that. And Paddle and Sail Foundation, that's not necessarily for profit. A lot of what they're doing is donated time and, activities like that to try to get kids connected. We've also held preliminary discussions with the Oneida Nation, and the Oneida Nation might be interested in jumping on board with this at some point. So all we're talking about right now is doing some of that preliminary engineering to see if any of this is feasible and it will work, and then go out looking to the community to partner on implementation of the plans.
Okay. Or Campbell? Looks
So
like
they
you're
throw a
ready.
heck of a fireworks party when I ran Schuderwer's dock for
You got any pictures?
3 years. Their cabin, a little trivia, as long as you get a shot, was Al Capone's cabin, for real.
Oh,
Okay.
Right down by Schuderwer's dock down, the very, very end, that's where their cabin was. So I met the old man. I don't probably think he's alive anymore.
Oh, I'm pretty sure Chet.
Really? Who? What's his name?
Who?
I forget.
Chet.
Oh, this is,
Chet.
no, he was barely ticking then.
Well,
But anyway,
Do you-
good family, I mean.
it's your district.
Yeah, not really, but it is.
This isn't your district?
I make a motion
you make a motion? All right.
to
Motion
approve.
approved by Campbell. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Eck. Any other discussion? All in favor, please
Wait,
say aye.
did-
Oh,
I just want
Oh.
to know, are you here, what?
Yeah, I was gonna
They're
say.
here for number 4.
Okay, all right, as long as
Good,
you
thank
know,
you.
I just want to make sure we're not
Appreciate
forgetting
that.
about
I
our,
knew they were.
Oh, no.
I guess I
They
forgot.
said hi.
I know who they are.
okay.
I guess I forgot one more thing, and I know
Chester.
Steve talked about in this whole, I think you're talking about the same plan of bringing in the city launch.
That's
Part of a,
That's connected to this, but not
Right.
part of this grant.
Yeah.
That would be almost like a phase 2.
anyway,
Well, that's improved quite a bit over there too. Which is
Right.
Good stuff. All right, so we voted. We all said aye, right?
Yes.
Okay, aye. Good. Number 3, consideration with possible action on the review and award of contracts Parks 1123 Murphy Park pickleball courts to Vinton Construction Company in the amount of $117,183.20. Director?
Just
Yeah,
kidding.
And I didn't even say, wow, that's in my district.
Yeah.
But I could have.
Well, you went Murphy Park.
Did I say it like that?
Yeah, you did.
Murphy. All right, Director?
Okay, we received, we received one bid from a contractor on this. That sole responsive bid was Vinton Construction Company. Base bid amount was $117,183.20. Included in the packet is a memo from Corey Mim in the Parks Department indicating that Parks is agreeable to that contract, so staff recommends award.
Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just have a question. Are we building new pickleball courts? I thought we were just striping them. Striping
No,
is
that was in
different.
other ones. This is a totally different project.
Yeah, I think,
We
Okay.
it
voted to
sounds like
like
they're
just
taking out the
stripe
tennis
a
courts.
bunch of
It
them.
must
That's
be
my
for
understanding.
that amount.
That I don't know.
Okay.
That Parks scope the project, we're just responsible for
Right.
construction and administration.
I guess the only
Tennis-
concern I have is, have you walked by pickleball courts and heard the noise? I mean, it's noisy. So we're,
No, I have not.
okay,
We-
well, that's one issue. That's another issue that we have to work on, so.
I mean, we have one of
Buffers.
our tennis courts at John Muir that was transferred to a but you could, they just use the tennis courts, you know, they just change,
Right.
put the lines.
But is there any kind of noise issue with
I
the
haven't seen
neighbors?
anybody use it as a pickleball, so I have no
Oh.
idea.
Okay.
I played tennis on it.
All right. All right, any other discussion?
I
Go ahead.
assume this falls within our, I mean, one bidder, you always worry it's gonna be out. Doesn't La La Land too expensive? Does this fall within what we thought?
It does,
Okay.
yes.
It's not a solid deal.
All right. Any other discussion, committee?
Well, it's your district.
Come
I make a
on.
motion to approve.
Second.
Second by Worth.
We talked our chair into it.
Thank you.
Going weekend.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
They agree with
Please
it.
say
Aye.
aye.
Fantastic.
Maybe we could have, bring some of that over to Colburn, like, we'll
Yes,
have
we could use some work over. it.
festival or
I feel like I'm not getting anything.
Oh, no.
you've had quite a bit. All right, number 4, consideration with possible action on request by Department of Public Works to complete a feasibility study regarding creation of a transportation utility to replace the local vehicle registration fee wheel tax. Director?
This is an item that I have discussed in brief with both Alder Sawyer and with Alder Weary. One of the items that Alder Weary had forwarded on to Common Council for consideration with the 2024 budget was looking for alternate funding sources for some of our infrastructure. And one of the items that state statute currently allows for is the creation of municipal utilities. So looking at transportation systems through the same lens that we look at water distribution or wastewater collection or stormwater collection and treatment, transportation can be viewed as a system and would be subject to the creation of a utility to manage and govern that utility. So we have brought Jeff Mazonik with R.A. Smith in tonight. Jeff is probably the foremost leading authority in the state of Wisconsin on transportation utilities and the formation. Jeff has done studies for multiple municipalities, including the villages of Pewaukee and what's the
City of Wisconsin Rapids.
is it Watoma that I'm thinking of?
When they had trouble.
No, I don't think they, well, we'll get into it in Jeff's presentation, but, so what Jeff has done is Jeff has created a model that takes a look at land use and the number of trips that are generated by properties. And the model that R.A. Smith and Jeff have come up with has 2 components to it. One is an equity-based component, and the second is a trip generation component. So with the equity-based component, there are certain costs like engineering time, routine maintenance, that benefit all the system users equitably. So what we do is we look at the number of parcels in the city of Green Bay and we split those costs based on a parcel, per parcel base cost. So a 7,000 square foot average residential parcel would pay the exact same per parcel fee as Procter & Gamble, okay? So if that base fee winds up being $5.75, whatever it is, okay? But everybody pays the exact same fee based on a parcel basis due to those things that are common to all. Then for variable type costs, that the more trips you generate, the more impact you have on the system. So road reconstructs, resurfacing, things of that nature are more heavily impacted by the number of trips that are generated. What they do is they take a look at the properties and the number of trips that those properties generate. Add those up and come up with a total cost per trip then multiply that back to the number of trips that a parcel would generate, and that becomes your utility bill. So it gets billed out very similar to a stormwater utility. So that's kind of the basic construct of how the utility works. With that, I'm going to have Jeff come on up, introduce himself, and we have a presentation that we can.
Okay, good.
Make a motion on the floor.
So you can see the
Okay.
share.
By Worry, do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Eck, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
At this point, with a presentation,
Do we need that?
our consultant would be considered to be
Like
like staff, so.
All right, never mind.
You already started an argument without ever even speaking.
Yeah, well, you know, it's not the first time.
You didn't put much of a fight up.
Hello,
Can you use
Jeff.
the FV button, F5.
F5?
Yeah, I'm Jeff Mazzonic, thanks, thanks, Steve, and I did hear you on the way in say this would be a short meeting, so.
Yeah, well.
That's all right.
that's
Do you
fine.
have these
And you were
slides in front of you
silently
also?
Yeah.
smiling?
You
We
do,
do.
okay.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have them here too.
All right. So there's a lot in here that is very familiar with you, but there are some things that may not be. So I'd like to be as conversational as we can be with it. Steve pretty much covered half of the discussion.
So is this a
There we
fairly new, I mean, before you get into it, is this a somewhat, you said you worked on getting this together, is it a somewhat new type of setup?
Two-part answer to that. The concept started in Tualatin, Oregon in the early 1990s, and I got to meet the fellow that started it back then. I met him about 20 years ago. It was the first of what are now about 30 active transportation utilities or street maintenance fees, different names, in the state of Oregon that continue to this day. Second part of the answer, in 2002, the Village of North Fond du Lac was frustrated that small village, they would do capital street improvement projects every other year, which wreaked havoc on their property tax rates and stuff like that. And somebody in a public meeting asked the city or the village manager, can't we just put it on a utility bill on it? And so she opened up the idea of the transportation utility. I was fortunate enough to propose on that project and win the work, and developed a transportation utility that was trip generation based for them 20 years ago. Ultimately, at that time, they decided instead to do a stormwater utility first because they hadn't done that yet. And then the board, one went to prison and one,
Oh, boy.
so they didn't get back to it. And then there was a big time frame gap where nobody really advanced it until about 4 or 5 years ago. Since then, there have been a few that have been started using a little bit different methods, and we're working on number 14 or 15 now. Different cities, different villages that have done different things. We're going to get into in a minute into the legal background and some of what's going on in the courts. That's caused some communities to hold off and pause. Some have decided it wasn't right for them for whatever reason, and some have gone ahead. So we'll get into that in a little bit.
Okay.
But that's the.
Well, it's an interesting concept, because I know that there's been a lot of discussion about the wheel tax, et cetera, and, what we need to do and can do, and et cetera, so,
Okay.
all right.
So the street funding thing, I think, again, there's nothing on here, and it works. There's nothing on here that's very new to you at all. I think, though, what I've been finding by going from different communities around the state is that some cities or villages rely heavily on special assessments for street reconstruction, which are very painful, and others have been using wheel taxes or vehicle registration fees on it. Others yet are increasing their debt because the debt repayments outside the levy limit. An example of that, the city of Janesville in 2016, I believe, passed a resolution requiring them to replace or repave 12 miles of street a year. And that increased their borrowing to the point they were starting to consume their capacity on it.
Can I ask what percentage that was, like 12 miles out of how many in Janesville? Because
Well, Janesville's, the closest I can do with that is they're about a 65,000 person community, and you're about 105, so the equivalent would probably be 16 or 18 miles, I suppose, if you do the math, right?
Well, we don't get that.
Substantial amount.
Wasn't it 22 in 4 years or whatever?
Yeah, pretty substantial. On the left, the thing here that we're recognizing is that streets tend to have an average life, if they're concrete or if they're blacktop, right? Let's say 40 years. That should mean you'd be replacing 2.5% of your streets a year. Nobody's doing that. So
That's
the demand
the whole,
continues.
I know all
Superior.
the worries brought that up.
Here's 3.5.
All right.
So what is a transportation utility? Obviously, you folks are very familiar with utilities, right? The same thing, except the difference is that it provides and supports the infrastructure to safely move goods and services throughout the community on it. So it's the same kind of concept with it. I think you probably have a parking utility as well. You know, you have a handful of those, you're familiar with them. As Steve mentioned, the most similar comparison to the transportation utility concept is probably stormwater. We'll get into that in a little bit. So how are they funded? Steve also mentioned that the utilities billable unit, or the basis, you know, you've got 100 cubic feet units for water, and for wastewater, you have ERUs, or impervious area, for stormwater. In this case, we're using trips generated per property on a average weekday. Average weekday trips is the basis. There are a couple in the state that are using other measures that we believe this is much more valid and defensible than some of the other measures that are being used. For example, one city is using impervious area. I don't see the correlation, right? So we're talking about a trip generation basis on a property level like that. So the legal status thing, not an attorney, but this has been going on for a while. When this started 20 years ago with North Fond du Lac, we found that cities and villages, incorporated communities, by constitutional rule, enjoy home rule authority. You have some privileges and authorities under home rule that were the basis for this, and were the basis for formation of the first 10 or so stormwater utilities in the 90s. The statutes, the current state statutes, do not expressly authorize this or prohibit stormwater or transportation utilities, so home rule has been the basis for formation to this point. So a few years ago, we started working with the village of Pewaukee to develop a transportation utility with the village, and it's been in place now and collecting user charges for almost 2 years on a quarterly basis. In April of 2022, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce sued the village, claiming that it's a tax that violates Wisconsin law, and because of, you know, statutory authorizations not there, and uniformity, and they also claimed that the village just simply lacked the authority on it. So that case went forward. The Waukesha County Circuit Court broke that down to 3 specific questions regarding: does it have the authority? Is it preempted by state law? And is it a fee or a tax? Now you guys are familiar, of course, you run utilities, the concept between a tax and a user charge. It's common for people to call anything they don't want to pay a tax, but we're going to make the distinction between what a user charge is versus a tax. Okay, and that's what this question really boiled down to. The court went through all this and issued a decision in March of this year. No, last year.
This year.
This year, yes, this year. And they said that, yes, the village is empowered to create a transportation utility. Again, they recognize the Home Rule Authority. They also recognize Statute 6134 that gives the village authority to manage and control property, meaning its streets. So in other words, they're obligated to keep the streets up. And then third, the ability under 660621 to create and operate utilities. So they cleared the first question. The second question on whether it's preempted, well, again, there's nothing in statute that preempts or that prohibits.
Just clarify.
Yeah.
When you say they cleared that, satisfied it, the court?
Cleared might be the wrong word. Again, I'm not an attorney.
That's why,
The judge ruling was that there is no preemption by state law prohibiting.
okay, so the village had the right to do it.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, just
Yes.
clarifying that.
Well, there's no statutory prohibition, and it doesn't impede the free use. There was a claim that this was like putting a toll booth up. That's nonsense, right? And it says, and actually, and this is actually, I pulled this right from the ruling, specific statutes do confer the authority, I think it was the last chapter in the statute, to enact the transportation utility fee. The third question is maybe the more meaty one. They did declare that it is a fee and it is not a tax, because the primary purpose is, again, looking at the function, how it collects funds and what it uses them for. The fact that per statute the village may impose a special charge, and also based on the use of the funds and where the funds are being applied with it. And the fact that the funds are dedicated only to transportation. So their conclusion on the fee versus tax thing boils down to those 3 points on the right. It funds a service that's provided by the municipality for the benefit of the users. The funds are used only for road maintenance, so you can't pull the funds out of this and use it to fund a library or anything else. And the charges are reasonably related to road use and maintenance. So
Well, maybe we can talk about it later, but the whole thing about, I was just trying to understand the concept of somebody using the road more often, or something to that effect, that they would be charged more, or how do you figure that? How do you?
How do you calculate who uses it more?
Yeah.
You will be getting to that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's-
Just be
and it's-
patient,
Doesn't
right?
get into this.
And it comes back the other way. It's not how much you as an individual are using the road, so much as how much does the property that you're traveling to or from generate in terms of trips. And I think that's the difference that we're looking at. So the decision then ordered that the motion for summary judgment be denied, granted the village's cross motion, dismissed the case on all claims raised with prejudice and statutory costs. That was a pretty good day. March 9th, April 21st, however, WMC came back with an appeal. And so that appeal is still active, it's pending. There hasn't been a decision yet, and we're waiting for that. And
So
I-
something like that, if that goes through, that'll be a landmark decision for Pewaukee and then for the rest of communities in this state or anywhere. It's pretty much for the state of Wisconsin, correct?
Well, it's interesting, the landmark decision concept, because all it's doing is affirming what's there. It's not creating something new in that
Well,
sense.
as long as it's legal, you
Yes.
know.
But because of this uncertainty, a lot of communities that we were working with actually went on hold. I had the city of Appleton's model done. I think I had 400 properties left out of 27,000 to assign trips to. And they said, well, let's just wait, see what happens. A number of communities did that, and for, understandable reasons. The other thing that's happened alongside of this has been the town of Buchanan put a transportation utility in place a little bit earlier on it. And that was found by state Supreme Court ruling to be not viable, not legal, but substantially different from this. The town doesn't have home rule authority because they're not an incorporated community to begin with. And their user charge model was not purely use-based. It was also based partially on property values, which clouds the whole thing, and then they used some of the funds for non-transportation costs. So our perspective in that of the League of Wisconsin Municipalities is that the state Supreme Court ruling on the town of Buchanan is irrelevant to this. Okay. But ironically, that ruling from the state Supreme Court came out the day before the city of Wauwatosa's Transportation Affairs Committee was going to vote on the ordinance to enact it or not. And they said, well, this is cloudy, murky, let's wait and see what happens with the Pewaukee appeal. Frustrating again, but reasonable, right? So the League of Wisconsin Municipalities weighed in 2020 on this, and they issued an opinion, and they're saying, in order for these to be legitimate, they believe that in addition to those primary legal requirements, fees have to be kept segregated, should be collected the same way as other utilities. Obviously, they need to be as accurate as you can be with them. Tax exempt properties have to be treated the same way, right? And also with credit policy. And then be able to show any specific unique factors on a property that would affect their use. And then lastly, along this, when you are dealing with your water utility or any others, there are certain things that you have to do for those user charges and that structure, the cost structure to be legitimate. These particular items here too. Allocated in proportion or relationship to use benefit, understood, administered, and then relatively stable. So those prior couple of slides are kind of form the basis or the framework for defining what the utility is and how it operates with it. So now we get into what Steve covered so briefly, so kind of thoroughly a few minutes ago, but developing and implementing a transportation utility with it, how do you do it? You're starting out with funding objectives. From city to city or village, what I'm finding is there are different goals. The City of Wisconsin Rapids, which has been billing monthly now for 2 years, they looked at 3 budgeting levels When they started with that first bubble establishing a funding objective, level one was $550,000 a year to replace their special assessments. Special assessments are, I don't know if the city doesn't do that, right? Green Bay? For streets?
Right now, we are still levying special assessments. The special assessments on residential properties are being handled by the local vehicle registration fee, and 50% of non-residential loan properties are being handled by the local vehicle registration fee. The remaining 50% for non-residential are still being subject to special assessments.
So you understand how onerous they are and difficult. Level one for them was the $550,000 a year to replace those. Level two was a $2.2 million budget that would cover their annual street program as it is. Level three, $5.5 million would move that street program up to a sustainable level, 2.5% a year equivalent, right? A lot of changes there, but in the process, they ended up going with level one, and they are currently raising money to replace the special assessments. And they are a city that has its own power utility, so they do monthly billing, and they're active with that. So
Is this Pewaukee yet?
no, that's the city of Wisconsin Rapids.
Oh, Rapids.
Pewaukee bills quarterly on it, and they're into 2 full years now. So you create the model. We'll talk a little bit about how that happens with it. You use that to create the user charges. There's an important process in there of engaging the public. Obviously, this is a big deal. You authorize the utility, then if you go ahead with it, and then you implement it and start administering it. And at that point, it becomes similar to how you administer your stormwater utility. That used to be conjecture on my part. Now that we're working with a couple communities doing it, that has been their experience.
Do you find that, I think a lot of times with citizens, there's the perception like, well, there's another bill, it's another tax, it's another whatever, and I know you're trying to talk about the fact that a utility can be quite efficient and we can do some really good things with it. So do you find that you deal with any of the perception from citizenry that like, uh-oh, here we go again?
Absolutely.
So
Of
you have
course.
to- well, yeah.
Of course, and some of that is dependent on what you're doing with it. So way back 20 years ago, the village of North Fond du Lac wanted to stabilize costs. So they pledged to their community, they would reduce their property tax by an equivalent amount. It was $1 for $1, $1 for $1. And the advantage to a residential property owner then was that their cost drops substantially because you were bringing into then the paying base, those non-taxed properties, and at a different scale based on benefit and use.
So I think one of the things we deal with the special assessments and that they're relieved on roads that are being redone, repaved, and it's beneficial for the folks that live on those roads, but everybody else is also chipping in for that. So is this more equitable for, that you have a utility set up that everybody's involved paying into this, or is it just like, well, a few people benefit and not everybody?
Well, I think that over time, it hits everybody, one. And two, your question is different in every community. The city of Wauwatosa, which is ready to roll now, once they get off their hold, they decided to not get rid of special assessments, but instead drop the amount. So they would drop the special assessment from, I think, 40% or 50% to 25%. So their philosophy is, you still have skin in the game, and when you own a home on a lousy street, and that street's all of a sudden a new street, you do realize some improved value in your property on it. So they're correlating those things, and that's their philosophy. Yours might be different, you can blend.
Well, right, I mean, like I said, I had my road done 12 years ago, and I had to pay over a 3-year period to pay that off, but now you got folks that don't have to pay it on.
Yeah. So the city of Wisconsin, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
the city of Wisconsin Rapids,
Well, I appreciate you answering the questions as we go along instead of waiting to the end, because sometimes I think you lose track. And I think we're operating all right here.
You said conversational. So.
But,
yeah.
so, I've gone to Wisconsin Rapids a couple of years in a row, and I stopped at one place that's been there for 100 years, restaurant, very well known, been there forever. Since and I learned a lot about that town. I've never hardly been there till I went. And anyway, from the hotels to the restaurants, breakfast or otherwise, or even how they advertise. I realized it's almost a ghost town there, so I'm wondering, because of the mill closing down, and that was like, it's not a city, it's not a destination, it's a pass-through now, and that's what these business owners told me. I mean, you could just feel and see it in the whole town, and the different, it wasn't residents, so I'm wondering, you know, how can you move forward with that study at that stage of that game, when you really don't even, that town is almost lost.
Well,
right
so
now. And that, so you get what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
But then, and then the same thing, how would like Door County do it with so much, you know, so much through, say, Sturgeon Bay as a municipality? How would all that extra summer traffic affect all of us?
Sure.
You know, so the two comparisons of,
Well, much of the summer traffic goes by on State Highway. I always go through the city, most people don't, right? So you have that. In Wisconsin Rapids, the mill shutdown was about the time we were starting to talk about doing this with them. And I believe that's why they went for that 550,000 level, not the higher levels on that.
Okay.
Because the mill capacity is there, but much of it is, I think 70% of it or so is gone in the last, would it be 4 years now?
I mean, everybody moved out.
Yeah.
I've never seen so many houses for sale because there's no reason to live there anymore. I mean, that employed half the town, you know? And that was very interesting. I mean, I had to go by the place and go, wow, you know?
Well, on the upside, that happened before this, so.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, right.
just interesting, the two comparisons there.
I think we've hit all this. I think, try to move on here. Having a little glitch.
Didn't mean to take you off track.
Well, the slides will bring us back, and if we hit something, we'll just skip it. It's weird, huh? Steve touched on this a little bit, but, you know, you're starting off, we started talking about the first thing being setting a budget, and I think you already said some cities are looking to replace assessments, others are just trying to increase the funding, or some mix of those things on it. We look at each property, we look at how the property is used, how large it is, how big the operation is, and assign trips. We'll get into that in a little more detail. You total up all the trips for the community, and that total number of trips, or you can call them billable units, right, divides into the total number of the budget. You come up with a rate per trip, and you use that to calculate the charge. So the equity Steve was talking about on it, or the whole concept is that each property's paying on the basis of how much it impacts the system in terms of use on trips generated.
Residents or businesses more so?
All. But residents are one unit, so, you know, in your, I'm not sure if you're an ERU-based stormwater utility?
Yes.
Yeah, so, you know, your residential stormwater utility rate is the same for all residential properties. The Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation statistics are the basis for this. Justin Schuler with me is a traffic engineer, that's his world on it. That's the basis for these average weekday trip numbers we're using. And per that data, their stat is that the average weekday trips from a single-family home is 9.43, where a trip is every time you cross in or out of the property.
So you're counting it as there, back, that's one?
No, there is one, back is two. So coming here tonight was you generating 2 trips at your property, 1 in, 1 out, and you're generating 2 trips at City Hall, 1 in, 1 out. Okay. It also applies to every property, taxed or not, whatever, that generates trips. So the only exceptions are properties that don't generate, undeveloped properties that don't generate any trips like that. So on an individual property basis, this is City Hall. There's a trip statistic for government office buildings. This building has a certain size. You have a number of trips per 1,000 square feet. I think it's like 14 trips per 1,000 square feet for a government office building. Times, say this is a 20,000 building, do the math, that's the number of trips assigned to this property on an average weekday. And then that goes into the model and is part of the total with it. We'll show some examples, but other scale factors, in addition to size of the facility, are things like number of students in a school or acres in a cemetery, you know, that kind of thing. So you have the rate of trips per unit times the total units, come up with the total number of trips on the property, and as I said, then put them in the machine and add them up. So that the Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation statistics provide data like you're seeing on the screen for 200 and some uses, something like that. This one is the single-family home. In each case, I'm going to show you three, but in each case, there's a description, a narrative that describes what we're talking about. There's also graphics that show the data, number of units and number of trips generated. This tells us that this is trips on an average weekday per dwelling unit, and then this is the 9.43 number I mentioned with it.
But so, I keep going back to it, so you look at a house that has a family of four, versus a single person, that type of thing.
Yep.
Is there a bit of an average if they drive to work, what if they're working out of the house?
Yep.
All that kind of stuff.
So it averages all the way across. The question, that issue always comes up, and then the second follow-up comment is that my Aunt Polly hasn't had a car for years, right? And then you sit back and think about it, and what that means is that everything that she needs is coming to her generating a trip by somebody else. And if she were driving, she would go out in the morning and she would get a cup of coffee and stop at the post office. She would do multiple errands as opposed to having the visiting nurse come in, having the, so they're still
They're still a
generating
trip.
trips at the property even though the owner isn't actually driving those trips, right? So there is certainly, there was a time in my life I had teenage kids at home and it was Grand Central, and now I don't, and so that it just levels out over time. And I think you'll see too how that plays out when we start looking at example costs.
Just working remotely, like you brought up, it
Yeah.
really changes the whole structure.
Not necessarily, because as Jeff was alluding to, think about how many Amazon vehicles you see in your neighborhood nowadays. And 3 years ago, you didn't see that.
And that's
Or
considered a
DoorDash,
trip.
or.
Exactly. So those trips are still being generated by a residential household.
And this data
But it's
is.
different versus somebody working from home.
Right,
Because
but,
the Amazon, that's different. That's something
but
you're
it's a
ordering,
trip
that's not
that's
because you're working
generated
at home.
serving a residential property.
So the,
So whereas you have somebody who's working in a traditional office setting and they're crossing that driveway apron twice just to go to work and back, whereas somebody working from home might be ordering DoorDash and getting an Amazon delivery. Still 2 trips, okay? So over the course of the property, the use of the property, when we look at the variety of different applications that are going on this category of a property, it averages out to 9.43 for an average residential single-family home.
And these studies continue, and we see shifts over time. The first model I did in 2002 was using the 6th edition IT trip generation statistics. This is edition number 11, so there have been 5 editions in 18 or 20
so
years.
this is a formula that you came up with? Is there a name for it? Is it,
Well, no, the data here is from the studies conducted and published through the Institute of Transportation Engineers.
so it?
When we do a traffic impact analysis for a new project, a new property, and Dave Hansen would do the TIA, this is the exact manual and the exact methodology that he would utilize to identify there's a convenient, or a gas station, convenience store with a fast food restaurant in it. He would go to ITE version 11 and he would look up gas station with a convenience store with a restaurant in it, the size, number of square feet, and
There's
the
a
number of
number,
trips per
there's a-
1,000 square feet.
there's a-
This is exactly
Next to
how
a
Dave did
festival.
TIA.
Next to a festival.
this is where-
How about that?
Yeah, some of these questions may be silly, but I think they're just topics that, citizens would bring up too.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we're
But
citizens as well.
I guess what I'm trying to get across is this is not something new. Jeff is utilizing tried and true examples that we use for other purposes already. We're simply applying that same engineering knowledge, looking at a different way of calculating
This is
trips.
how you figure out our water and sewage. It's very similar to each property.
Absolutely. Again,
That's where I'm
making
trying
a
to
parallel discussion
bring it
back,
down.
when we were talking about the sanitary charges, I said, based on history, we know what the average strength is or average for residential wastewater. and everybody gets an allotment of 1,800 cubic feet per month in volume. So with that standard volume and an average waste strength, we know what an average residential user pays for a sewer bill. Same thing.
So
Exact
just as if you'd say Green Bay, this amount of people, with this amount of houses, I mean, that's your first division calculation, and then you start to break it down area kind of like, and then you keep breaking it down and breaking it down.
Well, actually,
right
what
to
we
the
do is
house.
we look at the parcels and what the parcels are zoned for and used for.
And then you just keep averaging and averaging and averaging and averaging all the way
Well,
down, right?
The averages, though, are within the specific use.
Right.
So here's example two. This is a manufacturing example and a description of what a manufacturing process is, which is different than an industrial use, because here you're taking raw goods and creating something as opposed to distributing, right? Same thing, this is showing you, this is average weekday data and the average number of trips, in this case, per 1,000 square feet. Third example I brought is a high school, and the high school metric that we're using is based on the number of students in the high school on it. Now, again, a very urban high school versus a more suburban high school, sure, there can be some differences, but you're averaging the data to come up with a reasonable base. This kind of data then is available for about 200 different kinds of uses, and that's the data we draw from.
I'm just stating that, because I know over time, Steve, we've talked at length about, this, about the wheel tax and various things and how we can look at it differently. And is this something that you've looked at a little bit yourself?
Transportation utilities,
All
I've
the
looked
time.
at them extensively.
Okay, right, but I'm just saying for this matter, because like I said, there are transportation studies that are done for projects, et cetera, but geared toward this, it's the same thing, right? Okay. All right.
We've studiously avoided reinventing any wheels here.
Yeah.
So again, I think, and actually Steve did hit this earlier too then, so you have a target revenue amount, you're dividing it by the number of trips, you have a rate per trip. Now you know how many trips there are per property, you have that base charge, you add it up. That's what that cost is per year for any specific property with it. Trips that don't generate properties are exempt, so undeveloped properties don't generate trips. Parking lots don't generate trips, they're just where the trips generated by the property you're going to, So if the parking lot was across the street for City Hall, you're coming here, you're not generating a trip at the parking lot, you're generating it here. That's that kind of thing.
You could break the same kind of study down per parks even, and then go, do we need all of these parks? You know what I mean?
Like I said, this is a, and I
Complex.
dabble at this a little bit, but it's very interesting. I'm finding this very fascinating, so.
Yeah.
But your questions are good, and they will come up, again, and they should,
I think if we didn't follow along as this, it wouldn't make any sense at the end if you didn't try to.
Yeah,
Stay
we
alive.
appreciate you letting us interject.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
personally, I love it, because then I know where you're at,
Okay.
This is just identifying where the data comes from to create the model and what comes out of it. So you're getting data from, the property information's coming from the GIS database, your parcel database on it. The trip generation rates are coming from the IT trip generation statistics on it. Of course, we're using other sources like Street View and other information, local information, and then utility account information goes into that model, so that what we end up with is a spreadsheet that gets exported to your utility billing system that has the utility account number, the number of base charges for that utility account, and the number of trips on it. Okay?
Do you include census data in any of this, or is that completely different? As far as numbers and households, this is a whole different
No,
thing?
no,
Okay.
no, this is simply
Just simply.
single-family home
Okay.
versus a multifamily. So, and I guess I should mention, kind of moving a bit in that direction, there are different rates for the single-family home that stands all by itself versus a duplex. Each unit of the duplex generates a little bit lower trip rate than a single-family home. A fourplex, 2 floors, four properties in it, is even a little bit smaller, like 1 less trip a day, or actually I think it's like 3 less trips a day. So the data does distinguish some of those kinds of things. Now, again, not the 3 teenagers at home next to the retired couple, both in single-family homes, but if they're in senior living or whatever, there's a substantially lower number of trips.
So along with that, head count, now we're down to head counts per roof, per apron. Where does the financial status average into this and
So-
how it can affect that? you know?
We'll get to, we can get to that. Don't let me forget, because I think when we start looking at actual costs examples, we'll show it, but it's heavily dependent on what you're doing with those funds. If you're offsetting the vehicle tax, the wheel tax, you probably have figured your average property has 2 vehicles, so you're probably charging them $40 a year, the average household.
Yeah, but right down to
Think
what,
there's
how
a max,
valuable
isn't
them
there?
are, the income of the
yeah,
people that
no,
afford
no,
those
nothing
vehicles.
like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, but.
I think
but
there's a max per household, isn't there, for the wheel? I don't think you're charged more than,
Is it
I don't
$20
think
per?
you
per-
did.
It's 20 per vehicle.
So if you have
But
3 cars.
we don't
it's
have
60.
it, there is no max. If you own 8 vehicles, you pay 160.
This is, I wanted to get to this. This is real data from the city of Wauwatosa on it. And you're seeing a paired bar chart where the orange bars are the value of properties in Wauwatosa based on the kind of property they are. So the big one down there, I know those, I'm sorry, that's small, but residential property values make up 64% or so, 65% of all properties in the city of Wauwatosa. So the orange bars are telling you what percent each of those different land use categories contribute to the property tax. So what that means is that if you borrow $100, the residential properties in the city, if you borrow $100 and have to pay it back, right? The property tax that the residential sector pays is 64 of those $100. The institutional or is zero. You can see through the rest like that. The blue bars are if you had the same budget and we're paying for it on a user charge basis from those same land use categories, that's what those categories would each be contributing. In every case where I've done this, and this number, 64%, I've seen vary from as low as mid-50s to as high as high 70s, but it's always, the highest one. Generally, the amount that the residential sector pays on a user charge basis is about half. So in this case, in Wauwatosa, it goes from 64.7 to 30, I don't know, I can't read it, 31 something, right?
Is this a setup that will just change year by year, or, depending on other factors? You can look at this and say, okay, this is generally the way it is for this community.
The relationship won't change year by year, right? The numbers will, I shouldn't say that. If over a period of 10 years, you'd have a massive, big increase of manufacturing or something like that, yeah, then you'd see these bars would shift a bit. They still equal 100, but they'd shift. The big good news for the residential factor, though, has to be made up somewhere. And it's made up in the services, retail. You can see it at the top 2 up there, retail and services in particular, where those sectors pay more based on number of trips they generate than they pay based on the value of their property, which makes sense. Okay.
So what we're looking at here is the orange bars represent the percent of the total valuation,
Yep.
total equalized value of properties within the city, or any municipality.
Okay.
And if we didn't bond, if we paid for 100% of our transportation needs through our budget, then in this case, 64% of all transportation fees would be borne by residential properties. Residential properties would be subsidizing manufacturing, commercial, industrial, other land uses, because when you look at it from a transportation usage perspective, where are the trips actually being generated? Residential properties only generate about 32% of the trips, but based on an equalized value, they would be paying 64% of the costs. So what this intends to do is take that transportation system cost and shift the responsibility toward those land uses that are actually generating the trips.
I'm just,
No, good, yeah, go.
usually you
Run.
say, is it, I guess, how are all of those businesses currently paying towards the roads? I mean, if a road gets.
Combination of those things that are covered under our budget, they're paying for it in property tax, and they are contributing toward vehicle registration fees for any vehicles that are less than 8,000 pounds in gross vehicle weight. Then they're also paying special assessments, 50% special assessments on the assessment portion of when a road in front of their business is being reconstructed.
The way I try to relate this, and so I don't have the soundbite down yet, but if you go out for lunch with 3 or 4 of your buddies, right? You can say there's 5 of you, you're gonna get the bill, and typically you're gonna split it 5 ways and you're happy, unless somebody's drinking a bunch, right? Then but you're gonna do it based on kind of what you all ate. The way we do property taxes would be at the end of the meal, you'd sit down and say, okay, bring out your portfolio, your net worth, and your net worth is double mine, you're gonna pay twice as much for your hamburger as I paid for mine. That's how we do property taxes. You're paying based on the value of the property rather than the benefit you get or the impact you create. And in this case with roads, every time we use it, we are creating an impact. Does that make sense?
Kids menu.
I mean, I like it.
That was an easy explanation.
That was easier for us.
Well,
I'll share it,
so
Amber.
businesses are going to be paying more.
We're getting to that very quickly here, right here, in
Yeah.
fact. This is real data, and just, I'll note that this was presented publicly in the city of Wauwatosa, so I'm fair to use it, it's public record. And this,
I
in
think
their
it's
case,
complicated enough, I don't think the general citizen would understand it.
well, everybody understands numbers, and once you put a number out public, nobody forgets that number.
So this is Wauwatosa?
This is
Okay,
Wauwatosa
that's what I was
data.
wondering when I was looking at.
Yep, it's urban city. And Wauwatosa is about 60,000 people. They're not quite as large as you are, of course, only a couple in the state are. But they're also a fairly mixed city. You saw the breakdown with it. You have more suburban areas within the city of Green Bay because you're larger, of course, they're a tighter urban, but it's not that dissimilar.
I was saying, could you then extrapolate these numbers out for us, or because we might have more commercial or industrial, that residential would go lower?
Well,
Or don't
the
we know
goal,
that until we,
the goal of our model is to create a model that gives you a high degree of confidence as quickly as possible so that you're comfortable making a fiscal policy decision. And then if you were to decide to go ahead, then get more detailed with it. So I don't think you'd feel comfortable with the projection of this.
yeah, because I was just looking at where's the single family, you're talking $50 a year, that's 2 cars right now, right?
Yep.
For our wheel tax use.
Well, keep in mind, though, that they're paying the 2 wheel tax fees, but they're also paying property tax, some of which goes toward
Right,
streets
I
and
know we
roads.
didn't discuss any offsets,
But
you
that
mentioned
wouldn't-
that.
Right.
Yeah, well, that wouldn't change, would, I mean,
Well, that's my point, is that it's unique to your situation and how you would use it.
Yeah.
We've done many of these studies, we've done together with Ellers and Associates, a municipal financial advisor, and they run through all those kinds of scenarios. I'm sure you'll do something very similar.
well, I'd like to see a chart that shows what all these people, all these types of properties would say currently be paying. Like, what would be the
Yeah.
difference than what they're currently paying? Because that really is a big deal.
In the
For us
case
to know
of,
that.
in the case of North Fond du Lac, where they did commit to $1 for $1, got $100 a user charge, they committed they would reduce their levy $100. Then I was able to sit down with a property owner and say, your charge on a property tax basis is X, and your charge on the user charge basis is Y. And some were up and some were down. So if you're looking at a first-class office space, like a law firm, right, it's gonna have really nice thick carpeting, it's gonna be a high assessed value property with not a lot of trips. Next to it, you might have a little diner, not a high property assessed value, but lots and lots of trips. Well, one's gonna pay more and one's gonna pay less compared to their relative tax load.
But the ones that pay more can afford more. I'm worried about the ones that pay less, that can't pay any more on an increase of something like this.
Well, there's sensitivity to that. The other thing that, and this also going back 20 years, I keep telling old stories, but they're still relevant. One of the gentlemen in a public meeting finally understood that personally he would be saving $50 a year. And he goes, yeah, but every time I get gas, it's gonna cost me another $5. The lesson I learned was, well, no, the cost per trip or visitor tends to be about 3 cents in most of the models like that. That's the impact on it. So it's all a scale thing. I want to explain a little bit here what you're looking at so that you don't take this as gospel as is. The variables are huge here. This was a scenario where the city was looking at a $3 million budget. If that number was $2 million, well, these numbers would all drop by a third, right? So it's, the biggest thing that I'm trying to express here isn't the actual number, it's the relative number compared to the other kinds of uses. You're looking at churches relative to single-family home, relative to hair salon, you know, whatever like that.
Are the number of uses pretty much the same, you know, the way you have it set up here? Would that be a general graph for all communities, or would it?
Well, I cherry-picked
You cherry-picked?
I cherry-picked the
Right.
types of uses here from, maybe in any community, typical community, there's probably 100 or 80
Yeah,
uses.
there's a lot.
Yeah.
So,
I cherry-picked the ones that I thought would be of most interest to a public audience on it.
Okay.
And just noting here too that the size here are true averages of those kinds of properties in the city of Wauwatosa. So that the fast food restaurant, the average size was 3,000 square feet. Actually, Green Bay might be larger because you have more space. One of the interesting things was the convenience store gas station in Green Bay is going to have big Quick Trips or other big stations. Wauwatosa is small, all those gas stations are very small. So you have some differences, which is why the scale it up thing is a little, you know, a little risky.
Well,
But-
you
but-
mentioned, I'm sorry to interrupt. You mentioned schools and how many trips. Are schools gonna be charged this?
Yes.
And I don't see that listed as one of your samples, at least I didn't see it on there.
Even like UWGB or NWTC, right?
Yes.
Would they be included then? Because they're obviously generating a lot of trips. Or Lambeau?
Right.
I mean,
You're right, I thought I had a school in here, and I
Again,
see that I
that
don't.
goes-
Lambeau's a lot of trips.
It's gonna cost us more as
You have a church
taxpayers.
in there.
Well,
If our schools are paying more, if everybody's
So
paying.
the total school district in Wauwatosa, because they thought they were gonna go ahead with this. And they met with the school district's financial guy. And the total bill in Wauwatosa at that budget level was $50,000 for all the public schools in Wauwatosa on it. So it's a substantial amount, but it's not huge. It's not gargantuan in that sense.
Compared to zero,
Well, compared to zero, it's huge.
yeah.
Now,
So I
so
mean, it is,
how would that be
again, it
different?
goes
But
back
right,
to,
but right now, you have schools that are impacting, contributing towards damage to your transportation system. They are incurring cost on our transportation system, and because they are tax exempt, they pay the city zero.
right.
Whereas
Because we
under a
pay our
model like.
property taxes to pay for
So-
the schools, so, you know, it's like it kinda goes
Right.
around, it's gonna be paid for
Well, I
by the
understand that,
citizens
but
at the end.
you're paying your school tax to operate schools.
Yeah,
When the schools are causing impact to our municipal infrastructure, and we receive absolutely zero funding from tax exempt industries or tax exempt land uses to help offset the impact for us to continue to manage and maintain our systems. One of the beauties of this type of an approach is it allocates cost, and it doesn't look at whether or not you're tax exempt.
so how's that
If
gonna
you
affect
contribute, if
schools?
you generate trips, if you cause trips to happen,
Which they do.
you have an impact,
Well,
and you have a cost associated.
Well,
So is that gonna
churches,
affect-
where's churches fall in that?
it's on
You
here.
know, it's
I know,
They're
but
charging
are they-
taxes.
Know that
are they
until we run the model.
non-taxable?
Did you mention North Fond du Lac had an offset for,
I'm trying to look.
to reduce the property tax?
Yes, so again, I've learned pretty quickly that how you intend to use the money affects this kind of discussion. When, the cleanest one is if you are actually going to reduce the property tax. Their goal again was to kind of equalize charges and costs and create greater equity and get funding from, in their case, they had North Fond du Lac has a railroad industrial operation. They used to have 500 workers there, building boxcars and fixing locomotives, paid no tax, running all their big trucks in and out through the village. So their goal was they wanted to get,
Sure.
and at their level of funding, the railroad would have paid $40,000 a year back then, you know. It's, again, more than nothing, but they hadn't paid anything. The school district's paying a stormwater utility charge each year. Same concept. Same with government office buildings, you know, same with your own buildings. The city would actually be getting bills for each building also.
Well, there's quite a paradigm shift here that we have to think about.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of good things here. It's very,
TIF district.
we're gonna study this.
TIF district.
But,
Let me,
go ahead, finish up.
I did pull a little bit of data from state, partial data from Green Bay. So I know from state of Wisconsin data that your assessed property value ratio is not much different from Wauwatosa's. It's about 65, 66%. Commercial 28. Obviously tax exempt is 0, but when I change this and you look at number of parcels, you have tax exempt, 6% of the properties in the city are non-tax properties on that. And those would be treated the same way as any other. So just, I mean, this doesn't tell you a lot, but I always like to kind of compare this, for what you were saying earlier, how similar is the thumbprint kind of thing of the
Have you
city.
had pushback from school districts on something like this?
Well, you know, sitting
Because-
down with these folks in North Fond du Lac, I had 2 experiences that I'll never forget. And one was, literally as the superintendent of the school was sitting down to talk about this, he goes, you know, if you do this, we're gonna have to fire a teacher. And then we talked, I said, well, you know, my hometown of Manitowoc just started charging students $60 a year to park in their parking lot. Well, North Fond du Lac never created the utility to send that bill to the school district, but they started the student. The second was the minister of the church was sitting down, and I kind of doubled down, that the minister was sitting down, he goes, you're gonna drive God out of North Fond du Lac. You know.
I mean,
And I went through and I showed him
If you
that,
charge me, I'm gonna charge you, that kind of thing, you know.
and I went through and I showed him that the cost for a church was typically about 3 times that of a single-family home. And I was trying to be helpful, I suggested he take up a special collection, and that was not the right thing to do. But the
A bake
point,
sale.
the point is that churches are treated on an average weekday basis too. They're not being hit for Easter Sundays on that. So they're again, they are benefiting, as Steve was pointing out, with schools. Same kind of thing.
So we'll let you finish up. then we
I got a
can-
couple quick, the utility administration, we talked about that. Essentially, you're gonna manage this, you would administer it very much like a stormwater utility. I'm not telling you it's put in place and forget, it's something you end up owning and running like any other utility. So that's not stepping around that issue, that's a big thing. Currently in Wisconsin, this is what's going on as best I know. There may be some others going on I haven't heard about yet. But active, Neenah, Wisconsin Rapids, Harrison, Kimberly, Pewaukee. Now, Gibraltar is a town in Door County. I think that the Supreme Court ruling in Gibraltar probably is going to end, the Supreme Court ruling of Buchanan really, rather I think is going to end Gibraltar, and they're talking about doing something different up there already with it. A number of cities and villages are on hold, waiting for the Pewaukee appeal. Some have considered it and said not for us for various reasons, and that's fine. They made an informed decision. A lot of interest out there going on right now. Again, a lot of people are keeping their powder dry, so to speak, until the lawsuit
The
thing
whole
comes
thing
up.
with Buchanan as a township, does that, if whatever's affected there, does that affect other townships, or is it across the board, other types of municipalities as well?
The part of it, the one part of it that says that they can't do it because a township, by not being an incorporated community, does not enjoy home rule authority under the state constitution, kind of knocks them right out of the water. Unless they could, what they attempted to do there was form a special utility district. And a special utility district is under different statute than a city utility. And right in the special utility district language, it says fees shall be raised by a tax on the properties. It was just, I think they were defeated by the very nature of the enabling statute. That's not the same for cities, and Steve's much more familiar with that than I am. These are the cities and villages that we've worked with over the last few years on it. I've listed them by population. Obviously, Green Bay is a little larger than the rest, but same process.
Well, that was very interesting. At least, I think we all found it that way. Although we're even writing
I know, I
like a
know.
Batman.
I just have notes.
Notes?
I can send some out, sure.
Good. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you. My first note was that I'm hesitant but curious. I'm kind of torn equally between it feels wrong and it feels right. Honestly, God.
Sounds like a song.
Yeah, make a song for that.
There is a
Oh,
song.
Taylor Swift.
If, in my world, if I were to create it, and Steve, I don't know what your personal goal as director would be, I would want to do more
The
roads.
little car moving.
You know, do 2 to 3%. I would want to do more roads. That's the way I could sell it to people, is, hey, we could get more roads than where we should be. But the number two thing would need to be, this is a positive outcome for a resident, or at least a neutral. And if it's a negative, we gotta have to offset it with something with the tax rate. So,
Yeah,
because
there's a
that public,
combination of-
engaged public, that's gonna be the kicker. That's gonna be the hard sell, right? I
Well-
mean, those are just kind of my initial blah.
Yeah.
Could I-
Did you have any of that right there?
Could I add something to that,
Reports?
Steve?
Sure, go ahead, Jeff.
Just for kicks, something Steve could do, I can help you with, but did a presentation like this to the Government Finance Officers Association, and because they're not in your business directly, they're more finance. We took data, you do road ratings every 2 years in the Whistler program,
Oh, I
familiar
know
with
those.
that? And the state also has come up with remedies to take a very poorly rated road and bring it up to par. It's not all that difficult to do the math to figure out your total road need to bring everything up to par on it. And I think that's the missing element for the public for much of it, is they don't know how deep a hole we're sliding into on that.
Yeah. Any more there?
No, I mean, obviously,
just-
I would hopefully get rid of the wheel tax and assessments, and this would just replace all of that.
With the utility?
You'd have to show the benefit of it, though.
Yeah.
Clearly show a benefit of it. And
And like I said, it's perception too. You gotta, if the citizens go, you know what, I mean, and I think with taxes or different things, like, you know, things will go up. It's like, you know what, we expect to do something, you know, getting some skin in the game. I understand that. But it's gotta be reasonable and just, et cetera. So,
What's the cost to create the model and the time to put it together?
Cost to create the model is gonna be somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000. Timing, we would expect this, in an ideal world, depending on how the data set turns out and how much of the information Jeff is able to implement immediately versus how much we're gonna have to fill in the holes. I would estimate probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 to 12 months to complete the model.
okay.
Do we have money set aside for
We do.
that? We do, okay. So it's an important decision before the model's even made if you want to go forward with it, but a lot of the questions won't be answered till we have a model.
Correct.
What came first, the chicken or the egg?
And
Yeah.
Carrot or the stick?
So I know that right now, so I'm trying to, I want to figure out how it applies. Right now, the roads are, there's city, there's county, there's state, and then I know we get some federal funding for certain ones. How does that affect all that?
This would apply toward the city
All
streets.
city streets?
Well, it would apply to the city streets, and it would apply toward the portion of joint city-county or DOT-funded state and federal fund projects that are city responsibility. So, for instance, on a Mather Street, we're currently in design for a section of Mather Street that's subject to SDBG funding. So we brought a state municipal agreement through to pay for that. Under that SMA, for an SDBG project, city is responsible for 20% of the project cost. So 20% of that project cost is the city cost. This would apply towards that. On a West Mason Street, when we reconstruct, excuse me, when we reconstructed Monroe, those are connecting highways. So that comes from a different federal fund and some state funding where the state picks up all that cost. We have no cost on that. So it wouldn't, nothing would be offset there. A North Maple Avenue, that's completely off the state's grid. We receive no state or federal funding on that. That would be 100% applicable here. All of those funds would be eligible.
Okay, and then what would be the projected increase in the miles of roads that we'd be able to do in a year?
That's going to be largely dependent on how we set the criteria. The model is going to generate the number of parcels and the number of trips irrespective of what our funding needs are. So when Jeff talked earlier, step number one is identifying what your funding goals are. So we're gonna have to come up with a couple of different scenarios that we want them to evaluate. So one scenario could be a $2 million or $2.1 million funding level, which just replaces the wheel tax, and how would we reallocate that? A second possible scenario would be to cover what we currently have in the transportation system costs that are currently currently picked up by our budget, plus whatever our current level of funding is for bonding. Then a third scenario could be picking up those costs which are under our budget and an increase in road maintenance projects, and that would be something that the council would set. Okay, we're currently running at about 1.6, 1.65. If the council were to say, we'd like to step that up and make that 2%, 2.5%, 3%, whatever that is, then what we would do is we would take what our current program levels are at a 1.63 or 1.65%. We'd estimate what it would take to do 2%, 3, whatever that funding level is or road replacement level is, that the council would set as an objective. We would come up with what that cost would be, and that's the cost that we would then hand over to R.A. Smith and ask them to build us a model.
Okay, and then, right now, the wheel tax goes through our Department of Transportation, right, that comes out
Correct.
automatically. So this would, it sounds to me like a whole new department for the city.
No.
Which, no? Okay. So how is the money, how is that, is it gonna be through the DOT again? or-
No, it will be through the finance
DMV?
department. We have been DPW has been in contact with finance. We are considering taking sanitary billing and stormwater billing off of the water bill and billing that independently through the city rather than through the Green Bay Water Utility. There are a number of reasons for that evaluation, not the least of which are concerns that water utility continues to offer to us, that every time our rates change, they are the ones taking the complaints because it shows up on the water bill, but it's not a water charge. So getting the utility who's actually incurring the charge to be the billing agency, everyone would see their water bill come down, but they'd see their storm and sanitary bill go up because they're not getting a separate bill right now. So we're already looking at, regardless of whether or not we were to proceed with doing this model, we at DPW and Finance Department is determining whether or not it would make financial sense for us to incur the task of doing the billing and receiving. Right now, Green Bay Water Utility charges between my sanitary and storm utilities about $1.7 million a year to send my bills out and collect the money.
So that would come
We think-
over to pay to our finance.
I have to pay the water utility about $1.7 million a year. We think we can do it a lot cheaper than that in-house. So if we can do it cheaper in-house, our billing software is pulling information out of off of a database with the number of ERUs. We would have to get a data dump from water utility on water meters, convert that into, same way their billing software does, convert that into the sanitary charge. And then our billing software would simply extract information out of the transportation utility fund and print the third line on the same bill.
Going
Would
on.
we have to hire more
You
people?
know, as soon as
We-
she's done.
Again, not specific to the TU. If we were to take over billing my existing two utilities, yes, we're anticipating it's going to be between 1 and 2 additional staff members. And the 1.7 million I'm currently paying water utility is going to go towards paying these people. I'd have to buy the billing module from our vendor, Tyler Technologies, and then we'd have to pay the staff charges, but that would be offset by the 1.7 I'm not paying the water utility.
Okay.
What do you
Thank
make
you.
of- no, Go ahead, go ahead.
So, before I forget, and everything you just said kind of chiseled that and what you said. So, I guess going back to my initial one, so is this replacing the wheel tax?
Yes,
And is this structured, is the wheel tax structured almost like this? Don't answer that yet. But this almost sounds, and it's like the wheel tax is the head title, and then everything that you kind of listed, I'm gonna call it a grocery list. Is that all part of how that wheel tax was? And is this just a new method to calculate, and does it help us move on? And is this gonna be the standard that we start using for all of our services?
Not the standard for all of our services. This would be a direct relationship for transportation only. Yes, it will replace the wheel tax. It will allow that program to expand. It will allow us to do,
It'll-
it could.
A huge
It could,
tool to figure
depending on what we
everything.
set as the funding objectives, it could simply replace the wheel tax. It could take our existing program and provide a stable means of funding road maintenance projects going forward. One of the things that we're faced with, and we dealt with this at finance last night. We have a certain amount of debt that the city is willing to take on each year. And every year, we have to go, and one of the things that I suggested to the finance committee last night is, let's just use 20 as a number, okay? Let's say that the common council elects to set their annual bonding limit at $20 million for levy-supported debt. Of that $20 million, we have needs in our capital programming, we have needs in our equipment replacement program, and we have needs in our fleet. So my suggestion to the finance committee is that at least a percentage basis, some sort of guidelines, doesn't have to be rigid, can move year to year, be flexible, get tweaked, but at least some guidelines for us, that a certain percentage of that 20 million is dedicated towards capital projects, a certain percentage is dedicated towards equipment replacement, and a certain percentage is dedicated towards fleet maintenance, or fleet maintenance and replacement. Then we know on a citywide basis how much money is going in each of those pots each year. And with capital, that gives our department heads the flexibility and the ability to meet with each other prior to submitting bond requests. Because if out of $20 million, if $16 million of that's going towards capital, then we know that. And we can get together ahead of time and say there's $16 million out there. Where's the priorities, okay? But we go, Jim and I go to that Russian roulette every year. And I'm putting together a 5-year capital program in the hopes that I'm gonna be successful in getting the bond request that I need. If I go in there and I can't get that bonding, then I gotta reshuffle my program. With a transportation utility, we now know what we're going to be able to generate in funding each year, and I can craft my CUP or CIP to be within the constraints of that financial funding model.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was
And
seeing for, you
it's,
know?
again, it's stable, it's not subject to whether or not Parks has a big project coming up next year, or Fire Department has to replace 2 engines at $1 million apiece, so I gotta give up a certain amount of money. It's transportation only, it's segregated money, it's independently tracked, and it can't be used for anything else, so it's a stable, sustainable model for funding transportation.
I mean, if it's that valuable of a system, tool, formula, I could understand why Alder Eck says, is this a different department? Because it could build into that, if it's that equitable, right? I mean, not saying we have to add it, put it in the budget, I'm just saying it could end up being a large tool.
Oh, I think it could be an incredibly valuable tool for us to be able to reliably do these.
I mean,
These projects from
we're
year
the
to year.
number 1 city in the world with the worst streets, you know, if it brings them together. Well, that's what it comes down to, the streets, right?
I just got a complaint, well, just now about the streets. Texted to me.
It gets rid of the potholes.
Oh, about Great Bay and the roads, yeah, so.
So, Stephen, going back to, when I've talked to you about the wheel tax over time. I mean, did you answer that question before? Was there a moment in time where you thought, you know what, I think this would be a good route to go, with this? I mean,
This?
Yes.
Oh, God, yes.
Was there a moment in time where you said, you know what, let's check this out, because, we constantly talked about different
Can
alternatives.
I tell you when that moment was?
Yeah, sure.
The very first time that I sat through Jeff's presentation on transportation utilities.
And that was.
The minute I heard of it, the minute I heard the presentation, saw how it was constructed and how the equity was based on distribution of the trips, I thought this is brilliant. This is how you apportion the cost of the system to those who benefit the most from the system.
And that was how long ago? that you got
2
that?
years ago?
2 years.
But
well,
after the wheel tax, which
Well-
you heard a lot of negative about that, so
Well,
you're gonna go through.
we
very quick.
utilized what we had at our disposal at the time. Transportation utilities were not largely discussed back then. They weren't very well known. As additional municipalities like us started looking for ways outside of the levy to create a sustainable model for funding roads, we had to look elsewhere, and it was folks like Jeff and R.A. Smith that came up with the ideas on, well, why aren't you looking at your transportation system as a user-based fee, the same way that you looked at your utilities? And that was just one of these watershed moments in municipalities that we went, my God, that somebody was looking outside the box, and they are the same. Yeah, we should be looking at them the same way.
However, you had mentioned how many trips outside of City Hall. I mean, to me, it doesn't make sense to charge the city. Because that was you listed that, or you mentioned that.
Yeah, if I can.
Yeah, the floor is still open.
Well, he said we didn't have to open
Well,
it.
Yeah, we don't-
Yeah, as a
He's a
presenter,
consultant.
he's
Fine, that's
considered to be
fine.
staff at this point.
Okay, good.
So it's important that the city assess its own properties the same way, just like you do with stormwater. Your city properties are paying the stormwater fee too. In fact, when you are challenged, it's gonna be important to demonstrate that you did indeed treat all your own properties just as well, just as strongly, just as fairly, just as accurately as any private one.
And
Who's
so it-
challenging it specifically?
Well, challenges, like right now, I'm sure Steve's dealing with the pending legislation that's being considered for moving stormwater utilities under the Public Service Commission.
Yes.
That came out of the chamber folks in Oshkosh, who don't like the city's stormwater utility fee, for example. They're also very opposed to this. Oshkosh has been looking at it for about 3 years. So you have some of those types of people or opposition. Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce is the plaintiff in the Pewaukee case with that, so you may have some of that. First thing they're gonna look at, they're looking at the legality. The truth is, the ruling that I showed you pretty much validated this model. The weakness there has been on, is it a tax or a fee, the challenge, and whether or not it's allowed under state statute when it's not specifically defined under state statute. And the court's ruling was that yes, it is. And we'll see what the appeal court does.
Any idea about that appeal court? I mean, that's like anything
Well,
else.
like-
When it goes to the courts, it's like, we gotta
I
wait.
expected that question, so I connected with the village of Pewaukee this morning. We thought that since that appeal was filed April 21st of this year, that it would have been resolved by Halloween, and he hasn't heard anything recently at all, so, any day.
Thanks, Chairman. Steve, you mentioned we had funds already. Where is that coming out of, what pot?
ARPA interest.
Oh.
Matter of fact, when we first started looking with finance department and realized that we were accruing interest on that
Yeah.
unutilized ARPA money, meeting with the mayor and with finance department earlier this summer, this was funding the study to do the homework was one of the first things that we identified as potential use for that money. So we've actually earmarked some money aside for that, aside from all the other ARPA interest requests we've entertained.
And then,
Will
thank
that
you.
change? Will that change in the next year? Because we have to
It'll change
allocate.
as we start spending that ARPA money down. The more we
No,
spend, the
no.
less
Good
interest we're gonna
question.
generate, yes.
And then secondly, the setting of the goals. You must obviously have some recommendations. You would
I have
make.
some ideas, but I wouldn't commit to those without discussing those with the committee, because we're gonna ask the council to buy in on this.
Because I imagine, I hope Hope you don't mind coming to council next week, but
Yeah. I was gonna
if this is
say
going to
that
council
same
next week,
thing.
there's 8 more people, and they're gonna be just as, woo, unless they watch the meeting, right?
Then that's what we should promote for them to watch.
I mean, you
it,
met with
for sure.
finance, did
Oh,
they
you
get a
wish
little
they
glimpse of
always
this
did.
last night, or did you just gonna mention we're looking at?
I just mentioned it to them.
Yeah.
So
And I-
you're talking about finance committee or the finance
Correct.
department?
Oh, no,
No,
read it 'cause he's
but
not
I had a
jealous.
conversation with the finance committee last night as well. Strongly suggested that they come to INS tonight to hear this presentation.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
I-
are you coming next week to council? Do you recommend it as a extra fee? No, I'm
Well,
just-
and-
as you know how council goes, there's gonna be 8 more people with the same questions, so.
What I'm
they're
hearing
gonna
from
be-
you is that you think it would be a great idea, so I will have a conversation with Jeff to see if he is available next Tuesday.
Probably a good idea, just
To get the
otherwise you'll
presentation
get
at
every
council as
single
well.
question that they normally would. It'll call, if you want to handle it all of it, that's up to you. but-
Sure.
I have a suggestion that, to send this, presentation as an attachment to the council members, which is, you know.
It
It
should be
will
in there.
be.
No, I
because
meant
it's-
like an email sent to them.
Oh,
But
I know
it-
it's gonna be in the agenda packet, but an email sent, it's a
And should
presentation.
we have more time?
You did that
between
with the
this,
green
Maybe not this,
water.
Well, and
maybe the meeting after.
I could also,
Right, to really
that's
give
actually a
everyone
great
a chance to
suggestion,
see
and
it.
we can do that first thing tomorrow morning.
I know it adds more to your thing, but I
Well,
just think it's a
but at
better
the
chance
same
they're gonna
time,
read
then
through
what
it.
we can say is this is very critical information.
Yeah.
And I strongly suggest that you review the presentation and the discussion that was
Yes.
held at INS prior to the council meeting next Tuesday, so we can avoid duplicating committee work at council.
And I think how
Thank
we all
you,
said it in
perfect.
the structure of this, as the questions were answers as we went along, it would be real easy to follow.
Right.
Don't you
so
agree?
is this
But
time
then.
sensitive though? You meant time sensitive, you were saying, what about the following council
Well,
meeting?
Yeah,
Because
give
the-
everybody
Fortunately, we don't meet till
one,
mid-January.
Yeah,
good
it's
window to look
mid-January,
at it.
Mid-January. I mean, after this one.
And we can push it out too. to 'em.
Is,
So
is
for-
the world gonna end if we don't sign this today? No.
Well, we can't
We
send it.
would like to move forward with this. Is there a timeliness aspect? A little.
Yeah.
Doesn't
I
have to be
don't-
under the Christmas tree.
Chair.
Go ahead.
I don't see, you mentioned a amount, but I'm not seeing it on here.
As far as the amount for
The
the,
amount specifically that you're looking for.
Just-
I've not done that yet.
Okay,
Okay.
well, it just said to complete a feasibility study, so I was,
was,
Well, he mentioned that, but
You
not
said
the
75.
goal
you
part,
mentioned the amount, but I just don't
75 to
see it in.
100.
Yeah, okay, so it's a,
right?
How much the feasibility study is going to cost?
yeah,
No, I don't have. I asked Jeff to come up and I wanted to get a feel
Okay.
feel for it?
as to whether or not we wanted to go forward. Then I will reach out and we'll actually get a final proposal.
so then we would have to vote on it again. On that, once you have the amount.
If you can, the council could also authorize up to a certain amount and then we can negotiate a
And this
fee.
is the ARPA.
Well, it just isn't
interest
listed.
one.
Up to
That's all.
5,000.
It just isn't listed, so,
That's what I see
What-
through.
Well,
yeah, 5,000. I
I was-
did hear
I was
that.
waiting for the-
Up
they were
to
pretty- they have good
5,000.
poker faces.
She's got-
Very good.
Steve, so what are your recommendations?
yeah.
Goals, that's, we're
Well,
almost there.
Yeah, go ahead.
What are my recommendations for the funding or
Goals.
recommendations on this item?
Moving forward.
This item,
Well,
the
the-
goals, because they need goals, right? I mean,
The motion.
Well, what I would like to see is to approve moving forward with the study and authorize me to get a formal proposal from R.A. Smith, and then execute that proposal in an amount not to exceed $100,000.
Well,
As
isn't it-
part of that, then what I would do is, as we come up with strategies or funding guidelines, the options I would like R.A. Smith to consider, I would bring those options back as an action item on a future INS agenda. Then, once we've had a chance to discuss that, then it goes forward, gets approved by the common council. Now I have the scenarios that I want Jeff to look at.
so it
Okay.
doesn't all have to be in there, because that's a big.
Correct. What I'd like to do is have a commitment from the common council to move forward to do the feasibility study, build the model. And then the very first thing I need to do is establish what those objectives are. That's the first step in building the model. So I'm going to have to do that probably at the first meeting in January. I would have to have something ready. But Knowing that, what I'm going to do is send another email out to the common council. Let's assume for a moment that the recommendation is approved and that the common council supports that. After next Tuesday, now I've got that authorization to move forward. Then what I would do is send an email out to all 12 members of the common council and say, we are moving forward. There are certain scenarios that we could look at. And for example, we could look at just replacing the wheel tax. We could look at maintaining our current bonding level, but taking it out of our bonding and putting it into the utility. Give a couple of
Different
scenarios
ways.
so that you have something to react to. And what I would ask for is response back from the common council as to whether or not you have a preferred alternatives, or something I have not yet considered. And then we'll craft that communication or that action item for the January meeting. Then by mid-January, we'd get council approval and they would have their final marching orders and we can start doing this.
Simple question.
Really?
Is this only
Go ahead.
premature to the Supreme Court or wherever it's at there? I mean, is this, I get it, are we doing the right thing and they just can't make up their mind? Can we move forward without a ruling on that?
So, Steve,
Yeah.
I can, from my perspective, I do take my position as a steward of taxpayer funds very seriously. One of the running jokes that I have had with people over the years is I can squeeze a nickel so hard that I can make the Indian cry and the buffalo wet himself. Okay? And you gotta be a certain age to even understand that joke.
Correct?
I don't know, yes.
That's better than his joke.
And even though I'm that fiscally conservative, I am 100% in support of doing this and doing it now. I wanted to do this 6 months ago.
And you held back because,
I was simply too busy to get to it.
no, okay.
With the
Don't
staffing
ever say
turnovers
that.
and loss of staff that we've had,
Okay,
I
I'm just
needed to
asking.
find time in my schedule to make it happen, and I finally got to it.
Okay. All right,
Right?
good enough. Well, committee, what do you think?
I think we gotta give it,
Give it a roll.
we gotta get all 12 on board
Oh, no,
here.
of course.
And they need to go through what we went through.
Well, we
So-
say that every time, so that's true. I mean,
So,
I don't, but I really think this is important, almost.
so this, I mean, it's gonna go
Jump
to
on board
council,
that shit.
and you folks probably won't be there, right?
I'm available.
Well, I mean, we did, I'm just saying that, to have that presentation again, I think would be great.
If Jeff is available, then, yeah, we can, I'll talk to the mayor about making sure we reserve 20
The reason I
minutes.
say that is that, and I like the running commentary, usually when we see things like this, we have to sit real quiet. I know that's hard for some of us, I know for me too. But sitting through everything and then asking questions later,
Yeah.
but I like the way that you kept it open and we could,
And staying on point. I think it would be easy just to watch it, if people would watch it. Because you really can't miss any part of any question
I
that we
still,
have.
I mean, I'm gonna be looking this over, quite a bit. I think it's very interesting dynamic here. But the whole thing about the amount of trips and, how you could have 4 teenagers and the other people don't, and is it equitable, and maybe we're overthinking it. But I think you're saying that there is a formula out there, there's something there that kind of equalizes it all out, and we just have to understand that as well as we can. So, all right, so what?
So we're agreeing on that, we just not need to get everybody to agree,
Well,
you know?
let everybody,
It's really-
they gotta all look at it, so.
to use that, to be a Randy Scannell for a second, where the rubber meets the road is gonna be when this comes back, and then being able to sell that to the public to pass it. That's where it is, but we won't know that till we get there and see
we
what
do
it
it.
is. So either we're interested in it to go forward or not.
I think there is some timeliness to, because there will be an election in April, I think, the way things are going, I think it would be good to deal with this, because I think it's an important issue.
Because that study won't come back till next summer
Well,
or something.
Yeah,
To be honest with you, that has not entered into.
Oh, really?
My consideration at all.
oh, okay, well, never mind.
What's
what has it?
What's driving the
Election.
timeliness of it? I'm 18 months out. I am planning on retiring in 18 months. I would like to have this study done and let's start making some decisions one way or the other. And I need to have those decisions prior to going into budget deliberations for 2025. So right now, hoping that we can get at least some preliminary answers by July and, potential, how that might impact how we structure the budget and the following bonding discussion for the 2025 construction year, so that I can get my house in order, so that when my retirement date comes in the middle of 2025, I'm not leaving the director with balls in the air. I am trying to get my house in order right
Oh, big announcement right there.
now. That's,
We heard,
that's not real big news to anybody.
no, but.
It shouldn't be.
No.
Term limits, I believe in that too. It's been here long
Term
enough.
limits.
I'm not gonna be able to look at a nickel.
Oh, I know, right?
Yeah, say that one more time. That's hard to want to remember.
Oh, boy.
All right, well, committee,
Well,
go ahead.
I'm always fine with waiting, and that can be anybody's decision if they're not comfortable. I am, because I'm fine with what we need to get. I can't make my next decision till I get more information. And I like the source of funding is the interest that we had from the federal government, and that's perfect. We don't have to dip into something.
Interest.
Yeah, it's interesting,
Interest.
yeah, so
No interest on our ARPA money.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
I'm fine with moving ahead with it up to 100,000 for me. Now, I don't know about the other eight or even on our,
Well, this is committee,
That's
so what do we say here?
that's my
You're making a
motion,
You're making a
is to
motion?
move ahead with the
Okay.
study
All
up to
by word?
100,000.
If you could come up with, I mean, is that just a number off the top of your head, Steve, or is it just
No, that's some discussions that I've had
Up
with
to-
Jeff,
up to.
based on what it's cost
Well,
to do
let's
the
see.
studies in Pewaukee, what it goes up.
Up to 10,
Up to what?
220.
He's trying to look at their face.
Trying to see.
Let me gauge
I'm
where
trying to-
they're
You're
at.
trying to get them to break and they're not.
Trying
going
to
to.
renegotiate.
Well, it
Where
seems
are
a
the
little
chips?
bit, if we're saying how much we're willing to pay in
Yeah, I
front
know,
of
that's
people,
always
like
the-
we have this whole,
Boy, you
Yes.
guys are really tough.
The
Anyway,
bid-
so we have a
no.
motion, do we have a second?
second?
Second by Campbell.
I like it.
Some great discussion tonight. Any other talk, any other comments? Otherwise, let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All
What
opposed?
was your,
What?
The motion was to approve, Steve, could you?
Yeah.
The motion would be to approve proceeding, approve the feasibility study, and then authorize the director to negotiate a contract not to exceed 100,000.
Okay,
And we have that in our ARPA interest?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's,
Or-
I mean, that's understood, isn't it?
Part of
Well,
it,
it's not only understood, it's actually written right into the report.
Okay, as long as we know that.
Because the next
Makes it
steps
easier.
are some very important ones when we set the goals and the parameters. Those are going to be very, very important. of what-
Correct.
What you or the council of the
Right.
city will want out of it. Those are very important, so we have to get that right.
Yeah, we indicated in the fiscal impact section of the header,
that'll.
that the finance
be-
department has set aside ARPA interest funds to complete the study. This will have no impact on bonding nor levy-supported budgets.
I like the fact that there's possible combinations
Yes.
too, like how do
Sometimes
you,
look at
how,
it from a-
like how is the utility rate calculated, you know, replacing assessments, reducing borrowing, fill funding gaps, you know, there's different scenarios that we can talk about, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, rather than just all or nothing of something. And I like that concept, so we have to brainstorm about that, so,
Curious,
yeah?
look forward to going forward. I'm not saying I'm going to back it at the end. You might come back and look like total garbage and I'll hate it. Or I
No,
might come
that's-
back and be like, this is work
This is
out.
it.
Right?
Exactly, but until we
Well,
do
I'm
the
the
study,
same.
we'll
We
never
can't.
know.
I'm right
Right.
there.
All right.
I'm
Well,
curious.
I
Thank
like
you,
to be
gentlemen.
fiscally responsible,
I'm-
yeah.
And if this
He does play
helps us
poker,
achieve
by
it,
the way.
great, but if it comes back to like,
Right? Chris, you're a poker man.
yeah,
Yeah, sounds good.
yeah,
Thanks so
right.
much, guys.
All right.
Yeah,
we
I
gotta
should
keep
rather
moving.
not have
Thank
been able to,
you.
thank you.
Never.
I was supposed to be an MC tonight.
Nice
somewhere,
job.
right?
Thanks,
Right.
Dan.
I was supposed to go to a retirement party,
Ain't gonna happen.
but this was worth it.
Yeah, it was. It is what it is. Okay. Number 5, report of actions taken by the Department of Public Works, granting of licenses. We got sidewalk builder. Can we do these all together?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so sidewalk builder, we got tree and brush trimmer, we've got underground sprinkler system, so. Right?
Motion to approve all?
No, this is a receipt placed on file.
Okay,
Again, all we're
receive and
doing is
place. Sorry, I
reporting
guess I
on
need
it
to
that we
look at
have
that.
granted
Thank you.
the
Thank you, gentlemen.
licenses to those who are identified.
Okay, so,
Sorry.
receive and place on file by Eck, do we have a second?
Second.
Second by
Weary.
Campbell, that's fine. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That passes unanimously. Informational, director's report on recent activities.
Only two items that I wish to bring to your attention tonight, both very brief. One of the projects that you have heard about at Parks Committee for, some of you, 7 years, the Finger Road Ball Field Complex. The Optimist Club erected the building. What we need to do is serve the municipal utilities to it.
Bathrooms.
We opened the utility contract yesterday, and the utility contract came in. We had 8 bidders bid on it. Low responsive bid was approximately $197,000. Parks Department had $200,000 set aside for the project, so it came in within the available funding. You've already granted us the authority to award that contract at the staff level, so we will be notifying the contractor tomorrow, getting those contract documents processed and in place, so we can start construction as early as possible in the spring. So that project will be going forward.
Weren't they, I thought they were working on their own contractors or something, and then they were gonna donate, or was that a different project?
That was for the building. They wanted to move forward and do it with the utilities, but
This is to get the
I
sewer
see,
line and
okay,
water
so
line.
constructing the building, but this is the utilities, okay,
Yeah,
got it.
okay.
It's a flush truck.
I can't let somebody do that utility work without us being in charge.
Yeah.
That's referred to as the Finger Road Ball Field Complex, okay? That's not how I think of it. That's the H&R landfill. I'm not gonna let somebody go rooting around on the cover of a landfill. There, you simply can't make a mistake. The
What did you really
economic
hear? What did you really
ramifications
hear?
of that kind of a mistake is something the city can't handle. So we have to do it.
Okay,
All right.
Okay, second thing, I wanted to make sure that we reported out to you that I was a little nervous. A couple of weeks ago, we identified that we thought that maybe with some good luck and a couple of good days of weather, we were gonna pave out. Because last year, we went through the year with a couple of streets that only had the first layer,
Burner.
and they paved Burner earlier this week.
Oh,
Oh, I
Burner is
did.
complete.
I was riding around, I almost rode down there, I would have
So
been.
Burner and Rosing paved out
And what, I think, Turner and Rose?
last Friday, right?
What's the
Last
other one?
Friday, we had a 50-degree day.
What was the other one?
Brozig is,
Yeah, that's all, southeast
Manitowoc
Not
Road
mine.
to Pecan.
yeah,
apartments.
immediately north of Main Street between
Okay.
Easton Pub
Sorry,
and
Econ Street.
Walmart.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a little parallel street that kind of runs down off of Manitowoc Road and then goes across to Harbor Freight.
Yeah. that's
So
it.
that section between Pecan and Manitowoc is Brozig. That also got paved out. So we had one good day in the 50s last week, and
You
things
did
were
it.
dry, and we got everything paved out, so.
So Steve,
Yep,
did
we
you
lucked
take
out.
any public recognition at all for the Burner Street deal? Or could I like take it all?
You can take it all. You can take it all. You can tell
I will,
everybody
I
out
will
there
mention
that-
our
Funny.
committee here, all right? you
Yeah,
know,
fine.
that we
I-
work with
so
together.
funny.
No, we don't
Look at
take
you.
in ownership on stuff like that. We're just
Was
happy.
pushing you.
So,
Heck, he had
I
to
do have a
call,
question.
he had to call one of my constituents finally on the railroad tracks. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm done. I went to get her signature and she's like, no.
Okay,
I know.
nice.
Well, I brought up something else I could bring up. I know we've had, thank you, Mr. Chairman, the
Go.
discussion on Oneida with that railroad track, and we can keep talking about that. That's-
Oh.
But that, whether to
Mine's bad.
upgrade it or not. But my thing I wanted to talk about was, is there any way that we can still have a truck or anybody with a rake go around and still get some leaves if possible?
Oh,
There-
boy.
I asked
they
you-
are trying to catch them as they can. If you have a specific
do.
location or locations,
Because-
let me know.
Oh,
and I will-
okay.
I will pass
I
it along.
emailed Chris
And
Perla
it's just
today.
a short little block.
One more compliment, okay?
Why are they so late?
The lady, the deaf
No, the
lady
railroad guy.
on the end,
He's
your
just-
girl girlfriend, my
Snow
new
came,
acquaintance,
switched it
right?
around.
I took a scolding from her. I already said, like I did for the other, one on the other end.
Okay.
I will go pick her leaves up. So, she has 25,000 followers now on next door, okay? On, you name it, I mean, she's probably listening right now. She'll watch it.
Get
He's
the
waving it.
leaves.
And she had a link of people, including another couple people that are my faves. They'd never seen kudos to the Green Bay Public Works Department. They've never, ever seen, ever.
Oh.
And they like, lived in Green Bay this long. kudos to them and their job in picking up the
Kudos.
leaves this year. I read it this morning,
Well, yeah.
and I thought I'd share that
Thank
today.
you.
Cause I'm like,
Is there
how
gonna
come
be
they're
a
not calling
charge
me
though?
complaining about it, you
Is there
know?
gonna be a charge? Because
For what?
well, to pick up some of the leaves, they said, well, if it's after the fact, you know, it'd be like $100 or whatever.
No. Nobody has ever said we were
Okay.
gonna charge for it.
Yeah, I just checking. You know,
Well,
because I
can't-
understand, you know, what happened
can't
in
tell
my
them where to
neighborhood,
win.
somebody
I
parked
can't
their car
guarantee
in
that I'll
front of
get
the
to 'em.
leaves.
And if we get a snow event,
I know,
Yeah.
and I plow them back into the yard, then we're done.
Right.
But right now, we've got good weather, we're not plowing. I'm not gonna pull the spreader boxes back out of my dump trucks. But we have other equipment, we still have our pans, the old rear
even a
load.
vacuum.
And I've got the
Yeah, one of
vacuum.
the elephant
Well,
guy?
Like the
The
elephant.
back, the back
Got that
trucks may
guy.
not work if piles of
Hard
frozen.
bark. Hard bark.
But if we can get out there with, it's easy to change the blade for a bucket on a loader. It's easy to take my tool cats and get the snow moving equipment off and get the push brooms back on the front end of of those. So as I have equipment that's easily convertible and we have conducive weather, I can have those go out there and we can push them into our leaf pans, the old rear load garbage trucks that have the, okay? So if I have staff available, and the weather's conducive, and we can go and pick them out. I'm not gonna go around the entire city and look
No,
at
I
every
know that.
route.
It's gonna be in the
If
upper
you-
40s.
If you send me an actual address or a blog that you know that there's something there, we'll do the best that we can.
You'll have it tomorrow.
Awesome.
That's
That
good.
trailer court right in front of me by Dan's, they work, like, everybody brings them to there. That's about the only thing I see in my.
Well, that's all we asked. We asked just to look at it. All right, well, listen, is that it?
That's it.
All right, how about
Motion to adjourn?
motion to adjourn by Eck? Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Campbell?
Great.
All in favor, please say aye.
Oh,
Right.
receive the,
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
replace on file the director's report.
Yes,
Yes.
okay, by Eck, seconded by Campbell. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Now, motion to
No.
adjourn.
By Eck, seconded by Campbell. All right, thank you all. Oh, by the way, this all goes to city council next week for all you folks.
Either, but we don't have any.
So what did we decide